In today's episode, during listener Q&A, we'll weigh in on a question about plumbing pipe materials.
And later, you'll meet Christina Salway, an interior designer whose longtime love of old houses has led her to a dreamy project in France.
But first, I'm Stacy Grinsfelder.
And I'm Daniel Cantor.
And you're listening to True Tales from Old Houses. Hello, Daniel.
Hello, Stacy. How are you?
Very good. No tornadoes this week.
That's good to hear.
We did have torrential rain, but fortunately, we did not have to spend any more time in the basement.
Yes, likewise. And I can happily report with the torrential rain, my basement has not flooded again. So I think I have fixed my cistern issue.
Excellent. We talked all about that on last week's minisode. And before we launch into today's episode, I want to say a thank you to our season 11 sponsors, The Window Course by Scott Seidler of the Craftsman blog, Sutherland Wells, Abitron, and Noonan Heritage Craftworks.
Yes, thank you guys. We appreciate the support.
All right. So you fixed the cistern issue. That sounds like good news.
I think I fixed, 600 gallons of water later, I think I fixed the cistern issue. So I think we're back to dry basement land.
You only have maybe 599 more gallons to go before you find out whether it's going to overflow again.
Exactly. Meanwhile, my boiler has now started leaking. So that's a whole other, we're just having water problems. Anyway, I spoke to a plumber earlier. I believe it's a condensation issue. Boiler is where I get a little lost. I can rough in a house. I don't want to touch the boiler. It's too complicated.
Well, that is a coincidence because today we're going to play plumbers during Q&A, but I want to talk about some announcements really quick. The first is just to thank everyone, as always, for those wonderful ratings and reviews that you've been leaving. It's so helpful. It really does help new listeners find our show. It tells them that it's worth a listen, and we're so grateful for that. It feels great to hear that you're enjoying the show as well.
Absolutely. And if you're not into leaving ratings and reviews, we would love it if you would share the show on social media. Some people have done this recently. It's so fun to see. Just take a quick screenshot, send it to your followers. We'd love to know what you're doing while you're listening. And that helps us reach new followers as well.
Exactly. And the last announcement that I want to say, we've been saying this the last couple of weeks, is that we are still taking questions for listener Q&A. So feel free to submit those through the contact form on the website, truetalesfromoldhouses.com, or you can leave us a voicemail. And the way you do that is you will find a mic icon on the bottom right-hand corner of the homepage. Click on that little icon, follow the prompts, and leave us that voicemail. Leave us a question for us to answer during listener Q&A.
Is that all the announcements?
That is all the announcements. Did we do that quick or what?
That was, oh my gosh. Well, settle in. We have time.
So aside from plumbing issues, actually, I'm curious about the cottage because the last big episode we said, we'll talk all about that on the minisode, and that was last week. And we never even so much as said the word cottage. So do you have any updates for us?
I mean, that's probably kind of refreshing because I'm always talking about the cottage. But, well, I guess the reason we didn't talk about it is there's very little to say. So I think the last time we talked, I was saying that I had just gotten the contract, but I wasn't sure about the contents of the house because I did stage it entirely and, basically made everything available to the buyers for an extra cost, of course. But, the option is there. So I had been told with the offer that they were probably interested in at least some of it. So I was really hoping that meant most of it. It did not mean most of it. So my two updates basically are the closing date has come and gone, except I still own that cottage. And so I'm just sort of on pins and needles. I mean, the contract is signed, the deposits in escrow, all of that stuff is good. And we're just waiting on this title report. And I don't know what's taking so long. But otherwise, as far as I know, we are pretty much ready, except for the few things I still have to get out of the house. But I've been in the process of moving out.
Right.
Which is a lot. So that's pretty much it. What do you got?
Well, we are a little ahead of schedule here with the recording. So I'm actually getting ready to go into the 2 intense weekends at the Wood Window Workshop at Silver Lake. I'm really excited about that. I thought about telling you that it's already happened because it will be done by the time this episode comes out. And I'll say, oh, we had so much fun and it was great, but I'm feeling a little superstitious. So just in case something happens that I really need to tell you about, then I'll give you the real update later. But right now it's basically just loading my car over and over again and driving back and forth to Silver Lake.
Yeah.
It's good. Looking forward to it. Starts tomorrow. Like I said, according to this recording, the first workshop starts tomorrow night. And I'm excited.
How exciting.
Yeah.
It's so fun to meet everybody. It's like the first day of camp. I really liked it.
It is. Yeah. And we'll miss you. So I know that you're not going to be able to be there this year and we'll miss you. But
I will also miss you, but I'm sure you'll have a wonderful time. It'll be a great success. Everyone will learn a ton.
Brad and I'll hold down the fort.
Good.
All right.
He's good for that.
Yes. Well, we do need to take a break, but listener Q&A is up next. True Tales from Old Houses is supported by The Window Course. The Window Course, created by Scott Seidler of the Craftsman blog, you know him, is a step-by-step do-it-yourself program that will teach you everything you need to know to successfully restore your wood windows. What I like is that it's self-paced, so you can go as fast or as slow as you need, and there are several price points to fit your needs and budget.
Now that we're in these warmer months, it's window season. So now is the perfect time to restore your windows at your house. And the Window Course has all of the information you need all in one place. Scott is offering his students a special deal. If you sign up for the lifetime access package or training package, you'll also get a free infrared paint remover, which is a $100 value.
The Window Course comes with a money-back guarantee, and Scott is offering True Tales from Old Houses listeners, that's you, a special discount. For 10% off, visit thewindowcourse.com and use the coupon code TrueTales. True Tales from Old Houses is also supported by Sutherland Wells. All of Sutherland Wells products are handcrafted in Providence, Rhode Island, with the highest quality, sustainably grown tung oil. Tung oil, which is native to China, has been used for centuries as a durable finish for wood, metal, and stone.
Now, polyurethane is great if you just want a plastic coating that sits on top of the wood. But Stacy, what if I told you that tung oil finish penetrates the surface of the wood, so it flexes and contracts as conditions change, which makes it the perfect pre-finish or protectant for everything from fine furniture to window sash and sills.
All of Sutherland Wells products, they smell so good. You know how sometimes you open something and you think, ugh, this is burning my nose hairs. Everything from Sutherland Wells pretty much has a delightful citrus scent, and it works really well. I've tried several of their lines, but whatever you're working on, it might be siding, hardwood floors, furniture restoration, cutting boards, you name it, Sutherland Wells has a product for that.
So to learn more about the complete product line, visit Sutherland Wells, that's Wells, sutherlandwells.com. And to save 10% on your first order, use the coupon code TrueTales.
Welcome back, everyone. Daniel, are we ready to be plumbers?
Sure. I'm ready to pretend to do anything. Let's go.
All right. Well, today's question comes from someone that I am calling Jean. The reason why I'm calling her Jean is that we actually got this question on Instagram, and the person's username included Jean, but there was no additional information for a real proper identification. So I'm just going out on a limb and saying that this person's name is Jean. And what she wrote is, she said, I need to repipe our house. What is the best to use? PVC, copper, or something else? And I guess I want to say up front that you and I are not licensed plumbers. You've done a ton of rough-in and finish plumbing on all the projects that you've done. I've fixed a few things. I've bought plumbing supplies. I have shadowed or helped both an old school plumber and a new plumber. So I bring very little to this conversation. So it may be more of a pros and cons situation. I don't know that you and I can say this is the very best thing that you should choose, but maybe you can.
But we can boldly conjecture.
Yes. All right. But I'm going to let you start, as I like to do during listener Q&A when I don't know as much as you do. So go for it.
Okay, I'm going to do my best. So some of this also, I want to note up top, might be regional because of just different weather conditions. In other words, does it freeze or not? But I'm going to base this off of my experience in New York. So when we're talking about plumbing materials, there's basically your supply, so the pipes that carry the water to the fixtures, and the waste, and that obviously takes it away.
Ideally.
Ideally. Stacy and I have both talked about, I think in the last episode, how
Yes.
sometimes that malfunctions. So the basic gist is this. Up until, let's call it, I don't know, 30, 40 years ago, copper was your standard for your supply and cast iron was your standard for waste. There are benefits to both of those things. So cast iron is still used sometimes when noise is a consideration. So if you have, say, a waste line that comes from the second floor and it goes through a chase like in your dining room or something, and you don't want to hear that water flushing, cast iron is still a good option for that. That being said, it's really hard to find plumbers who want to work with it, I would say. It's expensive. And cast iron definitely has its downsides. I mean, if you've ever left a cast iron pot or something in the yard, it will rust immediately. And over time, cast iron does tend to rust out. It tends to split if it freezes or sometimes even if it doesn't. So the modern alternative basically is PVC. There's white PVC, black PVC. The white PVC is basically the modern day standard. And it's a very good material. It joins with nowadays they recommend a primer, which is generally a purple color, and a PVC cement. And essentially what those products do is kind of melt the PVC for a minute. And so when you join those pipes, it's almost like you're fusing them together. So it's a little less like glue and more like welding.
It's a chemical reaction. So those two products work together, create a little chemical reaction, and voila, you have pipe fused together with a fitting.
Yes.
This is what I bring to the conversation, Dan.
No, thank you. I need the help. So I think PVC is perfectly good and standard and doesn't tend to fail. And you can mitigate the noise issue. So at the cottage, actually, it's literally the situation I described. There's a 3-inch waistline that runs down from the second floor bathroom down vertically through the dining room and into the basement. So I basically packed the surrounding of the pipe full of insulation. It's built into a little chase and it really doesn't produce a lot of noise at all. So
that's a good compromise.
Yeah, I thought so. So that's my waistline information, I feel like. The supply line. Now, one thing I find with plumbers is the longer they've been around, the less they like new things. So older plumbers that I meet tend to still want to do copper for an entire rough-in. Copper is a very expensive material. If you've ever been to the scrapyard and scrapped copper, you'll be pleasantly surprised by how much you get for it. And it is much more labor intensive because you're literally soldering these joints together.
So one thing I know about copper too is that it is kind of isn't it antimicrobial or something? It actually prevents some of the bacteria and such that could start to grow in your supply lines.
Yeah, that is true. Like anything else, though, like any kind of standing water situation, you don't want to drink. So if you haven't run any of your plumbing for a long time, like maybe the house was closed up for a while, just run those taps for a little while before you drink anything. So the modern day alternative to copper is a product called PEX, P-E-X. This came out of Europe a few decades ago, but is actually fairly new still to the States. I feel like maybe in the past 10 to 20 years is when it's like really become kind of the norm. PEX is a really good material when used properly and with the right fittings. So there's basically, let's call it 4 ways to join PEX together. One of them is sort of the gold standard among your more legit plumber is going to have the equipment to do this. And it's basically an expansion. So it's like a little ring of what also looks like PEX and a little tool that like pulses and sort of expands it just enough to fit around the pipe and the fitting. You hold it there for like 30 seconds. It kind of shrinks back down. And that is actually sort of your most like reliable fitting as far as I understand. If your plumber comes in with what are called push fittings, or often colloquially called shark bites, which is a brand.
Yes.
Maybe that's a red flag because that is a person who probably, because shark bites are significantly more expensive as a material because you don't need any other types of tools. It literally, you push the pipe into the fitting and it creates a seal, but you pay a premium for it.
Well, and let me tell you this, because remember my nightmare contractor who did the upstairs bathroom and then I had to tear it all out and redo it? Oh yeah, he was the shark bite guy because he didn't know how to do plumbing. So he's like, I'm just going to shark bite everything. Oh, there were so many red flags. But yeah, that was a major, major red flag. So continue.
Yeah. So, I mean, there is a time and a place for shark bites for
emergencies.
Sure. Yes. If your pipe is like burst, you can, to solder like an end cap, the pipe needs to be completely dry or that joint will fail. A shark bite, you can literally just push on a pipe and it will stop the flow of water. So they're great for that. They are, I think, totally great if you can access them. So, for instance, like my basement is unfinished. I do have shark bites connecting certain things because if they ever were to fail, they're easy to replace. And I will say I've never had one fail. I have also talked to many plumbers who despise them. They think they're trash. They fail all the time. Again, I've never seen this. And
okay, so let's get back to the question.
Sorry.
That's okay. That's what happens when you know a lot. You have a lot to bring to the conversation.
I'm so passionate.
You are so passionate about pipes. Yes. All right. So we talked about supply lines. You talked about PEX. You talked about PVC as the waistline substitute for cast iron. We talked about copper. So if you had to sum it up, what would you do?
Before I can do that, I have to add one more thing, which is I have run into many installations where the plumber does not seem to understand that PEX is only acceptable when you cannot see it. Nobody wants to see PEX coming up through the floor, through the wall, up to a radiator, God forbid. So it is super easy to transition from PEX to a different material, right below the floor, right behind the wall, so that the trim you see on the outside is still pretty. So that's a big thing to keep an eye out for. Stay on top of the plumber. Do not have your everything installed and then be like, why am I looking at PEX? Like, catch it early. So to sum up, I think for my money, there's really no real reason to do copper anymore for the most part. I really like PEX. I will also say, I think in cases where things freeze, copper is obviously, it doesn't move a lot. PEX does have some ability to expand, so I think it's less likely to fail in a freezing situation. So I like PEX, and I also think PVC is a perfectly good material, and I don't overthink it. Yeah.
I just want to interject something. One more thing that I have thought of that I don't have an answer for yet. And that is that, down the road, we're always finding out, like when we had lead pipes and we brought our water in that way and we were all drinking lead water, plastic, PVC, PEX is a little bit different formula, a little different chemistry creates these flexible PEX pipes. I tend to stick with filtered water for drinking. I think that's about all we can do right now as far as protecting ourselves against something that may come down the road. I know that may not be an option for everyone, but I know that plastic and drinking from things that are plastic based, that's on a lot of people's minds right now. So I think it would just be remiss if we didn't mention that at all. But again, I don't have a better solution for that right now.
And it's actually a pretty simple thing to add a whole house filter. It shouldn't be very expensive. It's basically wherever above the shutoff valve is where the water's coming into the house, they'll cut the pipe, add a filter, and reattach it on the other end. And then your entire house has filtered water. So that's really good. The other thing that I think a lot of people vaguely know, but not sure why, is using hot water to cook or drink if you're trying to, get your pasta to boil faster or whatever. Don't do it, especially, and the reason is if you have a tank hot water heater, this issue is less so with tankless. I still probably wouldn't drink it, but with a tank hot water heater, if you've ever drained one of those things, it is disgusting in there. They do not get hot enough to kill all the harmful bacteria that can grow. So no matter if you're using copper or PEX or PVC or anything, just don't drink your hot water out of the tap or use it to boil or mix your baby formula or anything like that.
Good
super
thoughts.
Gross. Super
All
gross.
right. Good thoughts. All right. Well, thank you so much for that question, Jean. I hope we at least gave you some more information to either help you or maybe it just muddied the waters. I know that when you're faced with that issue of repiping your house, everybody's got an opinion. So this was ours. And remember, if anyone else has questions for us to answer this season, we are still taking them. So head on over to True Tales from Old Houses to submit those questions through the contact form or voicemail. So, Daniel, it is time for another quick break, but our conversation with Christina Salway is coming right up.
True Tales from Old Houses is supported by Abitron. Stacy, you and I, we love our old houses, our big old wood houses, but we cannot talk about them without eventually acknowledging the challenge of rotted and damaged wood. Windows, doors, columns, balusters, any other wooden features will ultimately break down if exposed to the elements for long enough.
And Abitron products can help. Now, for years, I have turned to Abitron's liquid wood and wood epox to make durable, cost-effective repairs on my own wooden doors and windows. The system, it contains two products. An epoxy wood hardener.
That's the liquid wood.
And a lightweight epoxy wood filler.
That's the wood epox.
And with those two products, the liquid wood and wood epox, you can effectively harden softwood, you can patch pieces that are missing altogether, or both.
Now, I came to Abitron after many, many years of experimenting with lesser wood fillers, let's say, and I experienced how quickly those repairs failed over time. I now have more work ahead of me to redo that stuff. I really, really love Abitron because there's no shrinking, there's no cracking, it sands and paints just like wood, and I have never had one of these repairs fail. I think they will outlive me.
Visit Abitron.com for all of the product information and to order directly. And available exclusively to True Tales from Old Houses listeners, that's you, Abitron is offering a 10% discount if you use the coupon code TRUE2024. So enter TRUE2024 at Abitron.com and save those existing wood features instead of replacing them.
True Tales from Old Houses is also supported by Noonan Heritage Craftworks.
You may know Joseph Parenti from Instagram for his work with historic exteriors in the Pittsburgh area. He's now extending his offerings to homeowners across the United States with Noonan Heritage Craftworks.
Stacy, as you and I both know, finding the right help to restore and maintain your old house can be a huge challenge. Where do you even start? What materials and methods should you use? Who can you trust? Joseph is here to help you. So schedule a phone call, video conference, or email consultation with Joseph to talk through your exterior project and help you game plan.
Whether you need to prepare a scope of work, a second set of eyes to help compare estimates, or even figure out the right questions to ask vendors, Joseph can provide unbiased guidance to help you steer clear of pitfalls and ensure success. So to learn how Noonan Heritage Craftworks can work with you, visit our special landing page at Noonan Craftworks. That's Noonan, NoonanCraftworks.com/TrueTales. Our guest today is Christina Salway.
Christina and her husband, John, have renovated various properties on the East Coast for themselves and for clients, but they have recently taken their show on the road all the way to France.
So jealous. I want to go to France.
I'm down to join you. Let's find our own little slice of heaven with an outdoor shower.
Hi, I'm Christina Salway. I am an interior designer and a home renovator, maybe home restoration enthusiast. I live in Brooklyn, New York, and I work all over the Eastern Seaboard and abroad.
Welcome, Christina.
Welcome.
Thanks for having me, guys. I'm very excited.
Well, we're excited to have you here too.
Anyway, so what do we want to talk about today?
So much, Christina. So just by way of introduction, I've known Christina for only like a year now, I guess, in part because you were on the same season of In with the Old that Brad and Stacy and I all appeared on. Well, you got the premiere episode though. And so that was on a house in Maine, but you have since done another house kind of near me and right near Hudson, but coincidentally again, you listed that house like a week before I listed my cottage. So we're just sort of living these weird parallel lives.
We are. It's funny. I don't know that we've actually really laid out that timeline, but in fact, we are living. We're just running in the same hurdles, same smooth parts, same hurdles, the peaks and valleys. We're doing it together.
Yeah. Christina's very much become a emotional support sale of houses person where I'm like, what is going on? And she's like, no, it was like this for me. So thank you.
I think that this is like one of the dark secrets of real estate is no one tells you how stressful it is and how difficult actually selling a house is. And I think also like as designers, we're not just selling a house. It's like you're selling a vision. You're selling something that is, it's like a manifestation of your own creative output. And so it's deeply personal. And often the people who are selling your house for you, it is a business and they're running a business. We're like, our whole soul is on the line. Whereas they're just like, well, it's up, it's live. And you're like, just like crying tears of blood. Like, I need details. So I feel like Daniel and I have been able to commiserate on this a lot. But this is now the Hudson house that we just now have sold. It's like I think the sixth house that we have renovated. And every single time just to be clear, I try to avoid the dirty word flip because I know that that's like synonymous with like gray paint and Home Depot tile, which is not what we do. But every single time it does not get easier, which is uncanny. Like I want to believe that like there's going to be some sort of like personal growth and it in fact is going to improve. Every single time it is so stressful. It's like an absolute like bloodletting. So it's not just you, Daniel.
I'm so relieved to hear that. It's been hard.
It is. It's so stressful.
So talk to me about six houses. Like you're an interior designer. You have clients all over. What was sort of the movement from doing these interior design jobs to your own projects that are not flips, but sort of similar to me? They're a few year. That's where we depart. I took 10, you took a couple, but
right.
Either way, not a fly-by-night renovation. Like, talk me through that transition, if there was a transition.
I mean, there are like multiple layers, right? The first house that John and I bought, we bought when we were like 20, 25. We were like, we were children. We were children in New York City. And I wanted to buy a piece of property to build equity in, which if you want to get into like the deeper baggage of that, as a kid, I moved like 1,000 times and I moved to New York City and I was like, this is it. This is where I want to live. I want to like put roots and I don't want anyone to be able to take that away from me. And it became immediately apparent that was a total pipe dream because I was 25 years old and I was living in New York City and there was no way I could buy something. And so I was like, okay, let's buy something little upstate, build equity in that. And we'll do that until we eventually earn enough money that we can buy something in New York. And that was a plan. This is the smartest thing I did when I was 25. I'm not sure I did anything smart after or before that, but this was like the one really smart thing I did.
I am so impressed that you did that at age 25, because sometimes when you're just starting out in your life, it's just real easy to overspend or not have a plan or make a plan and not keep it. So I'm so impressed. That's wonderful.
I mean, I think Daniel can speak to this because I think Daniel's sort of cut from the same cloth. There's like a tenacity that goes hand in hand with terror, I think. And I was like absolutely determined to like build a thing that was mine, right? So I think even at 25, I was very like determined to do that. So we bought this itty bitty little cottage upstate and we renovated it all ourselves. And it was like $80,000 or something. And we renovated it ourselves. And, that was when I like blogged about it and it went in the New York Times. And we sold it for like twice what we bought it for. And we bought another, and we lived there for, I think like 4 years. We had our wedding there. Like when my son was born, we went upstate with him there. And then like as he started to get a little bigger and we had like friends coming to visit, that's when it became apparent that this like 700 square foot cottage was like not really going to cut the mustard. So then we bought another house and it's sort of the same thing where it was like this absolutely rundown, like truly, if you look at the photographs of this house that we renovated in Callicoon, it really looked like a haunted house. I mean, kind of all the perfect jokes. Like one of the first nights we slept in it, a window fell out of the house, like exactly like the money pit. It was, but again, like we just worked on it. And I think what I found, and maybe Daniel, you'll feel like this as well, is in the process of doing that, right? Like there was this practical aspect of like build equity and like grow the nest egg. And also because we get to live in it, it also gives us this country house. Like, it has this sort of dual purpose, but it also became this test kitchen where I was like, oh, what if I do crazy wallpaper? What if I do bold paint? How do we build this? How do we make this? And it really became this sort of test kitchen where we learned how to do all of these things that we didn't know how to do. I mean, YouTube is a wonderland of information. And, we just started figuring things out one thing at a time. And every single house that has sort of grown exponentially, where we've become more and more bold and we've like added additions and added skylights. You know, at one point we were like learning how to refinish floors, and now we're like plumbing our own bathrooms, right? So it's sort of it's a growing snowball. And then the other thing that I have really loved, and I know that this has come up for Daniel as well, is that there's this like really beneficial, like kind of back and forth where a lot of what I learn while I'm working for clients is I'm exploring like new makers, new vendors, new textile, new wall applications, these things I'm exploring for clients. I then pull into my house. And so much of what I learn while I'm working on these houses, I pull back into the clients. So, I mean, there's this incredible empowerment of being able to, you know, now that I've built 6 houses or whatever, or restored 6 houses, when I'm having a conversation with a contractor and they're like, no, you can't do that. I'm like, well, I know you can, because
Right.
Right.
I have. So if I have, you can, because you're a real contractor and I'm just this guy. So that's how the, like, kind of the genesis of that is it started somewhere very practical. And then I think it's just evolved more and more, which is that there is something very practical about it, right? Like we continue to be able to build sort of nest egg, and other people have like Roth IRAs, and John and I have real estate because we're self-employed. So I just hope we die really abruptly, I guess is the plan.
In a way in the future.
Yeah. Yeah. Not now.
Abruptly at the age of 78 or whatever, I think is probably ideal. But anyway, but I think that like, you know, so there is like a practical piece of it, but also for me, there's like, it's such a catharsis to be able to like really creatively play and just do it. Be like, I want this. I like this. And I don't have, you know, so much of the design process when you're working with clients, unfortunately, is that you start with this really fun, exciting idea, and it gets diluted and diluted and diluted and diluted. And there's so much excess due diligence. And by the time you get to like actual implementation, this beautiful thing you came up with has so frequently been watered down that you're like, okay, we're going to do that. Excellent.
Mhm.
Now your home also looks like a West Elm. And you're like,
Nothing wrong with West Elm. Who
Oh, no.
sponsor me sometimes. Kidding.
and ultimately, like, I don't have that expectation for my clients. Their homes don't need to be a creative expression of my genius, right? I want their homes to be an expression of how they want to live and what they want their home to feel like. But having these houses and having these projects on my own end allows me to like sort of exercise that creative muscle.
Sure.
And so I think it creates like a greater balance where there's sort of less pressure on my client projects to be anything.
Brilliant.
Yeah. I mean, kind of. It's like they're allowed to be what the client wants. And
Sure.
I'm not
Right.
really the kind of, and different designers have different sort of approaches to this. I am not like a dogmatic designer. I don't go into someone's house and I'm like, you're going to have a Christina Salway. Like, that's not my thing. Like, you're going to have
That's what I say. You're going to have a Christina Salway. I'm
You
going to
do
do
you.
it.
But I think like I want them to have what they want. And my job there is to be sort of like a guide and a facilitator to the home they want. And that's my relationship with my clients.
So you were in New York City, then you went to Maine, then back to New York City, then Hudson, and now a very exciting project in France. Let's talk about that.
I mean, John and I have been together for like 7,000 years. We got together when we were in college. And right from the beginning, we started traveling. We both had like a real sort of enthusiasm for travel. And, you know, at the time we were just like the most penniless. So we were basically like going to, you know, what was it, like the student travel agency? Do you remember that? STA? And you would like
yes.
get like a printed itinerary that was like 7,000 pages long with the perforated edges.
Yes.
But we would save up all our money, literally do the thing where you like take all of your coins and go to the bank and get them to turn it into euros. And we would like land in a place and we would travel by train and had a backpack. And we were like living on gazpacho that came in like a milk carton and just traveling in Europe. And we would do that like every summer as much as we could. And we did a lot of that. And then we started going kind of just regularly just back to France at some point. Like we went to France and we were like, oh, France. I've traveled like a fair amount through Europe because my parents are both English and I was born in Belgium and my sister still lives in England. So I've traveled a fair amount in Europe. But there was something about like when we started going to France together that we were like, oh, this is really the spot. You know, I think like a lot of people, we fantasized for a long time about buying something in France. And then there was sort of the like €1 house like craze, you know, a couple of years ago, which, you know, kind of ignited that even more. And at some point we'd signed up for this. It's like a weekly email blast that comes from this website it's literally called French-property.com. They really went for it.
Creative.
Yeah, they were like, what should we call it? We're going to add a dash just to throw everybody off.
Little on the nose, isn't it?
Exactly. So it became this sort of like very charming, like rom-com tradition that like every Sunday morning, this thing would arrive and we'd lay in bed and John would open his phone and we would like scroll through the Sunday email blast of like properties that were for sale, French-properties.com for sale. And we would just like sort of look at them. And because we had traveled a lot through France, we at this point had a fairly good understanding of kind of where we would want to be and where we wouldn't want to be. And, you know, there are certain towns that you start to realize after you look at like enough of these email blasts that there's like the entire town is for sale and literally no one is there. And like, you don't want that house. And then there are other areas you're like, we became more and more familiar with the more we traveled. And this past summer, we opened the email and there was this property that had the main photograph was this incredible panoramic view of this just farmland. And then like kind of rising up behind it, this incredible like vineyard landscape and like blue sky. And you're like, what's that? And then as you scroll, what is that? And as you scroll through the photographs, it was this like relatively dismal, like stone village house. Like it's sort of semi-attached in this little village, but it was in a part of Burgundy that John and I were familiar with. At one point when Julian was about 2, we rented a house in Burgundy for like a month. And it was like a really sort of idyllic time of our lives where we were like pushing around a stroller and like picking blackberries right off bushes. And like, they're just cows and you're like, ah. So we have really fond memories of being in Burgundy. And so this property was interesting. One of those things, typically village houses, they're really all like Tetrised around each other. It's really uncommon to have a garden of any kind, and even more so to have a garden with any sort of view. That's just not usually how the village houses are configured. So it was interesting that it had this incredible view. And so I wrote to the guy and he actually wrote back, because I have a couple of times in the past, I have written to French-property.com and have gotten absolute crickets in response. This time the guy wrote back. And he actually said that he'd be willing to do a FaceTime tour with me. And so he actually got his daughter to show up at the house to do a FaceTime tour with me because he didn't know how to do FaceTime. And it was interesting, actually, like upon doing the FaceTime tour, it was much more promising than it had appeared when we had just looked at the photographs. Like in the photographs, it looked like the living room floor was plywood, and actually it was massive slabs of limestone, which is like 100% better than plywood.
Yeah,
definitely.
So we're like, wow, that's great. Like that's really not bad. Oh, I feel like I forgot to mention an important part about this. This house is 27,000 euros. So there's this beautiful view. That's not plywood, and it's 27,000 euros. Like now maybe we're talking.
That's
okay,
a Fiat.
Right.
That is a Fiat. That's like less than a car.
I did a quick conversion and I think that's around what, like 29,000 US dollars?
Yeah.
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 Wow.
It's really not much. We had this sort of moment where we'd like done this FaceTime tour and it seemed really promising. And by like complete coincidence, I have to say, this is like sheer coincidence. We were flying into Paris like 2 weeks later because we were actually meeting friends to go to a wedding in Turkey. So I'd like, you know, because I'm like the world's stingiest human being, like the cheapest way to get there was actually going to Paris and then going from Paris to Turkey. So that's what we were going to do, which was going to be a hardship. We were going to have to spend a few days in Paris.
Sounds awful. Yeah.
I know, you know, not all heroes wear capes. So we were already going to be in Paris for a couple of days. So first John is like, you should just rent a car and you should go down there and see it. And I'm like, well, that's preposterous, because if you send me, it could be a pile of stones and I'm going to come home with a house. Like I'm going to buy it because I want to do this. That's a terrible plan. I need somebody to be an accomplice in this bad idea. I can't be solely responsible for this ridiculous thing we're going to do. And so we decided, we made an arrangement with the realtor and we rented a car at like 7 o'clock in the morning and we drove down to Burgundy. And the realtor made an arrangement for us to see one other house that was kind of in the same area and in the same price point. Because in my mind, I was like, we should do some due diligence.
Let's look at something else.
Let's go look at one other house. So we went and looked at one other house that's a longer story, but it was a house absolutely full of bats, which felt like it was probably not a great choice for us. But actually, I mean, funnily, while the bats were extremely off-putting, it was a really remote village, this other house, whereas the town that we ultimately have landed in, the village itself has absolutely no practical infrastructure whatsoever. There's like a post office and like a town hall and I think a defunct hairdresser. I don't say there's literally nothing, but 10 minutes away, there's a proper town that has like a large hardware store and a proper grocery store and a weekly sort of beautiful market and a cinema and a sushi restaurant. So like you kind of have the best of both worlds in that you're in this place that feels very remote and really sort of bucolic. And at the same time, if you just really need, like an extra saw blade at 3 p.m., you can go and get one.
Yeah. So you saw the house, I guess. You got your accomplice, you saw the house, and now it's yours, which is so exciting.
Yeah. So ultimately, we did end up buying it, which is like a preposterous process that's totally doable. But like every part of it was so French. We had to pay, the French government requires that you pay a sanctioned translator in order to translate it. And you can't use your own translator. You have to use a translator of their choosing.
Can I just interject? Are you fluent in French?
I'm not fluent in French. I'm all right in French. I mean, this is like the running joke, which is that I can speak about the past and I can speak about the present and I have absolutely no hope for the future. Like I just cannot speak in the future tense at all yet.
That's my Spanish. You've just described my Spanish language capabilities. Yes,
exactly. So I can get along. And more recently, I had a situation where I had to meet a plumber and he did not speak any English. And so we really just sort of lumped along with my French. And I think that in some respects, I think that's a testimony to my ability to speak French, but I actually think it's also a testimony for my ability to speak plumbing. I mean, I was coming up with like ridiculous words where I'm like, the pipe for the poop. And like, I'm like, that's not what you call it, but like I could say that in French. So my French is like, okay, is what I would say. But interestingly, that again does not cut the mustard. According to the French government, you have to sign something that says that you are a card-carrying non-French speaker, and like you only can speak French in entirety in order to sign this document, or you have to have it translated.
Interesting.
Which is fascinating. So we had to pay a translator. And then there's this other thing that's very funny, which is there's someone you have to hire to do the process, which is neither a lawyer nor a broker. It's called a notaire, but not a notary. It's a notaire. And they only handle real estate transactions and they only get paid a percentage of the price of the house. However, unfortunately for them, the amount of work involved is the same, whether or not you're buying a 27,000 euro house or like a 270,000 euro house. So finding that guy was also a challenge because he's like, this is the worst deal of my entire life. I made like $7 doing this and it's an enormous amount of my time. I mean, there were hurdles, but it's totally doable and you don't have to be a citizen. You don't have to have a passport or a green card or anything to do it. John actually is an EU citizen. I'm a UK citizen. So hopefully the plan is eventually that I can like glom onto his EU citizenship when we want to stay there for longer periods. Mm-hmm. But like these are the things that people usually ask about in terms of actually buying a house in a foreign country.
Definitely.
And it's not quite as hard as you would think, actually.
Yeah, because I've certainly had the fantasy and you see these properties come up that are like 1700 stone villa in Italy for $4. And like, it's just like, but how do you do that? So you've actually done it. You might have said this. I'm really sorry if you did. Do you know how old this house is?
Apparently it's like the late 1700s or something. Wow. That's like the box. And then it's like the French equivalent of big house, little house, back house, barn, where they kept adding like additional boxes and layers on it. So when you go in the house, you can kind of see that. But the original box is like in the 1700s, late 1700s. Yeah.
Okay. So you buy the house. Now you're there. You're in a foreign country renovating an older house than you've ever renovated.
Yeah.
In France. What's the most challenging part about that? Or I'm sure it's profoundly different. I just have no idea how. Like,
I mean, there are certain things that are particularly difficult, like sort of like, logistical things. It's like so stupid. Trying to get our meter read has been, we ended up having to hire someone to be there to read our meter because the way the French electrical company works, they have to come and read your meter. And they've got like one day next April, I'm not going to be there. Is there any other day? And they're like, no. And then just silence. And you're like, well, do you have a solution? And they're like, no. And you're like, okay. And if you don't read the meter, what happens? And they're like, well, eventually we'll turn off your power. And you're like, okay. So like, I mean, these are these like sort of obvious obstacles of not being there full time. But, there've been all these interesting sort of like, just learning moments about, literally conversion from like imperial to metric, where the whole method of measuring that we have become completely indoctrinated and accustomed to, it just literally doesn't apply there. I'm like, doing anything, buying drapes and needing to do conversions on how much fabric I'm buying. But even like doing plumbing or doing electrical, actually the way that all the electrical fixtures the way they're wired is different, which ultimately it's not that much more difficult than how it's done here. It's just different than how it's done here. I mean, that I think is maybe the takeaway, actually. It's not that it's that much more difficult. It's just different. And so the first time you do it, much like the first time you do it here, it's like mind bending. And then eventually you're like, okay. So like the first time I changed the light fixture there were definitely tears. And then eventually I was like, okay, so this is how this works. And it's like this little clippy system. And eventually I got it. And now I can change a light fixture there without crying. But like the first time I couldn't. I think there's just like a learning curve that's inherent with doing it in a different country.
I'm vaguely aware that in situations like this, often there's pretty strict historic kind of protections and guidelines and stuff and approval processes. Like, does any of that apply to this situation? Or is it like, do whatever you want?
Seemingly, it's relatively do whatever you want. Part of that is that we're retaining the box. And ultimately, I'm not sure that we're going to do a huge amount of sort of reshuffling of the actual structure itself.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, that's been another part of this that's been really interesting, at least for us, renovating this house, which is that we're doing it in this very different way than we've ever renovated a house in the United States, which is like so much more pleasure driven, where we're like, what if we like paint this room and take a nap? And what if we, change this light fixture and go to the Bricon to buy antiques instead? And like, we will have owned the house for a year in October. And we are right on the precipice of having an outdoor shower. Up to this point, we have not had an indoor shower of any kind or an outdoor shower of any kind. And we literally have been showering in our kitchen sink. And when we first bought the house, we were like, this is our immediate priority. And then once we got there, we're like, actually, I think our immediate priority is enjoying this. And our like other priority is eventually figuring out how to bathe. And so we've sort of like backburnered a lot of the like, sort of the big projects because we just are really enjoying it. And that's like a fascinating exploration for us because usually we're so driven toward getting the project implemented. And sometimes that's like at the expense of being in the moment of actually enjoying the place. And we really, in this situation, we've really kind of inverted that. And we're just sort of like, it's already great. Like, yes, the wallpaper is like falling off these walls, but it's very pretty wallpaper. And it's, as long as it doesn't actually fall on us, I think we should just leave it like that for a while. I don't know. It's a nice way to embrace it, I think.
I love that. I mean, it does my heart good to hear that because we talk about overwhelm a lot on this show. And I think part of that is just that go, go, go urge to get to that arbitrary place where it feels like something. And all that creates is just work that leads to more work. And so I love hearing this take on your house in France where, like you said, I'm going to paint, and then I'm going to go take a nap. And I'm going to tell my husband about that because he would be thrilled. He would be thrilled. And I think it's a great way to look at our next project when we have one. So I appreciate that.
It's a good, again, like kind of a good muscle for us to exercise because I think as like sort of collective home renovators, there is this sort of sense of like pressing need to like make it right? Like to get it to where it's meant to go. And you sometimes do that like at the expense of your own well-being a little bit, where you're just so focused on the task. And it's been such an interesting thing to just sit there and be like, oh, this is pretty great. Oh, it's pretty great. So, I mean, ultimately, that's how we landed on doing the outdoor shower. Is it required like almost no sort of additional reshuffling? The way that the current plumbing situation is set up, which also is not super common. So you walk out the kitchen door outside and you like go up these two little steps and there's like burgundy, like, oh, just the hills are alive. And then to the left is a little door and that's where our bathroom is. So in order to get to the bathroom, you have to leave the house.
Right.
But the bathroom does have a toilet and has a sink with running water. And there's this sort of like funny little, it's like a garden bed. I think at some point it had something in it that sits right outside the bathroom. And I was like, you could probably just tie right into the plumbing in the bathroom, take a shower here. And now we're going to be 100% cleaner than we were to begin with. So what if we do that? And I think the idea is let's do that for a year or two. And then eventually I think, at some point, I think we'll like actually chug along and start making big projects there. But there's something really joyful about being like, what if for a year or two, we just love this thing and allow ourselves to not like churn so hard. It's like a fascinating thing to explore for me to be like, what if we relax?
Wow. Like that. I like that.
And I think like when it's a house that's that old, you get a little more permission to do that because it's like, well, it's been broken for 75 years or like, we'll get to it.
Seemingly forever. There's nowhere that there was apparently ever indoor plumbing in there. So
right.
It's been like that for 300 years. Like it can go for another 2.
Another element that sort of would at least give me pause to do something like this is obviously if a house is 27,000 euros or whatever, this is an area that is probably suffering from a little disinvestment and could use an influx of people like you who are interested in preserving it and enjoying it again. How has like the community reaction been to a couple ugly Americans from New York coming in and buying this property?
It's an interesting question. And we really wondered what that was going to look like, because it's this really small village. And initially I just didn't see anybody for like a week. I didn't see a single person. And I was like, it's just me here. I'm not like the king of the king. I am the king of Brion. And then eventually neighbors across the street came and introduced themselves and they were absolutely lovely. And in fact, I like joke that he's like my French godfather now. He appears truly out of nowhere all the time to like help me unload heavy things out of my car. He's so, so lovely. The last time we were there, they invited us to go to like an aperitif at their house and they invited like 4 other neighbors and everybody came over and everybody was so, so friendly. Then they took me on like house tours of their houses, which were all like just arrestingly beautiful in this like effortless, perfect. I think I told you this, that like at one point she was giving me this tour and she like took me into this barn and in the corner of the barn was a true pile of galvanized watering cans taller than me. And I was like, well, here's where they are. Like the rest of America is hunting for galvanized watering cans and you have them in a tower in your barn. I found them. So it just is like everything, it's like stunningly beautiful. Everybody has been unbelievably friendly. I think it helps probably. Like the second time I met my French godfather, he came to knock on the door. It was the day I was doing the electricity that made me cry. And he came and knocked on the door to ask me if I wanted to come to aperitif. And I opened the door literally wearing a headlamp. I looked like Doc from Back to the Future, like wide-eyed. I was like, hi, what can I do for you? I was like struggling with this light fixture. And I think that there is something that helps that we are doing so much of this ourselves. Like they see us carrying in furniture and carrying in wood and carrying in paint. And, I think they really see that we are like deeply invested in restoring the house, that we're totally in love with the place, that we're not just like swooping in with like a SWAT team of contractors to like make it into something it isn't. They like that we love it as much as they love it. And I think that goes a long way. But I also think maybe maybe we're really lucky. We feel really lucky. Like, cause it does feel a little bit like dumb luck. You know, we knew Burgundy. We didn't know specifically this town or specifically the larger town. And it just happens to have been that village is full of these lovely people and that it happens to be 10 minutes from this really functional place. So, I mean, we feel profoundly lucky, but I would say, I think people in these small towns are happy to see people. They're happy to see new people coming. And particularly if you are as invested in sort of restoring and paying homage to the thing, I think people are pretty excited about it.
Yeah, that's great. All right. Well, this is great.
Stacy's going to kill me.
I'm the mean person. No, all this stuff is wonderful. I've loved to hear all of it. So it's really great. But I was going to say, before we wrap today, I just would like, if you would, take just a minute just to tell us your company, especially how people can hire you for design services or maybe follow you on social media. We also did not talk about the fact that you have a tile line with Villa Lagoon Tile. I'm going to drop all the links in the show notes.
Okay. So the way you can find me most easily is on Instagram at Christina Salway, just as it sounds. And then you can also find my company website is 11211 Design. It's the zip code in Williamsburg. But probably Instagram is the easiest, most reliable way to track me down. And it is probably the best way to see the work that is representative of the kind of work I like to do for myself. So that's where I would go if you're trying to find that. And then I did want to just drop a note. I'm doing a tile collaboration with a company called Villa Lagoon, and it's actually inspired by my travels in France. So there are going to be two collections. One is about the city of Paris and one is about the countryside in Burgundy. And they're both inspired by my travels there. That should hopefully be out in the fall, and that should be really fun to see as well.
Very cool. So Christina Salway, spelled with a CH, Christina, and then Villa Lagoon Tile. So maybe follow those both on Instagram to keep up. Thank you, Christina. This has been great. We've loved having you here, and I appreciate your time so much.
It was a pleasure. I loved it. I mean, as you can see, I'm happy to talk.
Yeah. Thanks so much, Christina.
Thanks, Christina. See you later.
Thank you for listening to True Tales from Old Houses, and thank you to our guest, Christina Salway.
And if you love this episode, as always, let us know. Drop us an email, leave us a voicemail, and please consider leaving a rating or review wherever you enjoy your favorite podcasts.
To continue the conversation, join us on Facebook and Instagram at True Tales from Old Houses, and you can follow me at Blake Hill House and Daniel at Daniel Cantor.
And to learn more about everything we discussed in today's episode or request a transcript, visit truetalesfromoldhouses.com.
Until next time.
See you on the mini.